Hi, I'm Andrew McCrae. Welcome to our farm and ranch in northwest Missouri. My great-great-grandfather settled here in 1910, and I'm the fifth generation to grow crops and livestock here. As a farmer myself, I know the highs and lows of this life, the issues we confront every day, some new, some as old as farming itself. This show is a place to talk with farmers and others in the ag industry about topics that mean something to us, topics that can improve the present and future of our operations. This is Farming the Countryside. Ryan Zelinko joins me here on Farming the Countryside. He farms near St. Charles, Michigan. And Ryan, I appreciate you taking time to visit. Why don't you just start out by talking a little bit about where you farm and what the land is like there in your area?
We're central Michigan. A lot of people call it Saginaw Bay area. Where I farm, highly variable. You don't have to go 20 miles in either direction, and you can get, we call it the prairie ground, which was part of the Saginaw Bay, if you're looking 2,000 years ago, where there was a lot of sediment deposited. I could call that close to Iowa dirt. I mean, just uniform, beautiful. You don't have to because depending on how many thousands of years ago, we figured we were all underwater here. So where I'm at, we're variable. We're sand knobs, we're heavy clay, we're, low organic matter to mid organic matter. You can go 20 miles west of me and it changes again. It's highly variable all the way around us.
Sure. Talk about the year that you had last year. Was it a good year in that part of Michigan?
Yes. I mean, it was surprisingly good. We turned out our winters, we have to freeze out to get soil structure to break down. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've had zero frost or very, very little frost. One good thing now is we're looking probably 8 to 10 inches of frost. It's a blessing for us. When we do not freeze, we have a hard time getting the soil right this spring. We need it just for our area. I know out down south they never freeze, but it's something with our area. If we don't freeze, I mean, we were fairly dry. I mean, every one of our farms is tiled and tiled very well. A lot of the tile were stopped running, so the subsurface water was gone, but yet we could not. Everything was wet, muddy. I mean, you'd turn the plant around on the end, you would sink down 6 inches. There was no bottom to it. We struggled all spring trying to get things planted in somewhat correct conditions. Some of them were good, some of them were not good, and we were running out of time to push it.
Right.
Then the water turned off, and we turned extremely dry. I really wasn't expecting much of anything for yield, and then it was the best corn we've ever had in this area. I don't really know where it came from. We tried to look. I mean, I guess the point is when you think it's not good, Mother Nature will always surprise you.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because you had mentioned it was somewhat a surprise that the yields were as good as they were. So is there anything that you learned from last year or you think you may have that you said, well, I'm surprised and this is what I think happened to get us in that kind of crop?
That's a loaded question because what sticks in my mind is don't give up. The corn came up, we're kind of struggling. We're showing a lot of nitrogen deficiency, or not nitrogen, just elemental deficiencies all the way around. Pulling tissue test, but yet we get the tissue test back, everything's okay. I mean, it was more of an environmental condition of the way things got planted, the way the soil was, that the plant was outgrowing. I mean, by the time we got the test back, like I said, the plant outgrew that condition. So we started thinking, should we cut back? We're turning extremely dry. We're not going to have enough water to finish this crop out. Should you give up on input? Should we start cutting back on things? We were talking about doing doing fungicide on corn. In this area, I don't spray every acre by no means. It's kind of an as needed. If we're seeing tar spot, the best ground, we go after it just to try to save some of that yield if it does get it. We were talking, we got to cut back. We're going to have to take our chances with the disease, which turned out it turned dry. So we didn't have the disease. And after wanting to cut back because we were worried about yield, we had great yields. So it's a catch-22. I can't say don't ever give up, because if those yields aren't there, you're going to dig yourself into a hole. It's something every farmer's got to analyze for themselves.
Right. Walk me through what your farm does as far as spring. Are you using any tillage at all? And then what are you doing that might be different from some other places, as we think about just Midwestern farms or really anywhere in the nation?
Yep. Again, that's regional, farmer to farmer. There is some no-till around us, but very little. What I do, what works for me in the spring, soybeans in my area, they don't respond to a lot of tillage or deep tillage. My corn, for me, responds drastically. If I don't do a deep till in the fall prior to that corn planting, it suffers. So we're running, depends on the spring, we run either a high-speed vertical disc like a Dagelman or Pro-Till or a field cultivator, day-to-day, field-to-field. There's some years that I cannot use the high-speed disc with compaction. It's the best tool I have and the worst tool I have. Where it's great, labor is an issue. We can cover a lot of ground short amount of time. In some years, that's the best seed bed compared to a field cultivator. Other years, if it's wet and pushy, when I say pushy, that we're pushing the envelope as far as moisture and things like that, sometimes that field cultivator will leave us with a better seed bed. So we do a little, when I say a little bit, we till everything for our area, and most farmers around me do the same thing.
Right. It sounds like it changes quite a bit then from year to year for you.
Yes, very much so. And a lot of for my farm, a lot of it, we used to no-till a lot of soybeans, but just weed issues. Getting that little bit of tillage in the spring really helps with weed control and resistance with water hemp and things like that.
Let's talk about fertilizer and nutrients for a moment. A lot of us start with N, and so N program, what types of things are you doing and what seems to work well in your area?
I am complete opposite of textbook, and I am complete opposite of industry. Textbook and industry says you cannot put your nitrogen out front and expect it to be there. We've done it for long as I can farm. And it's, you never know in the year. If you get 6 inches of rain after planting, we plant and then put it on, we have the local co-op spray it on top. We use a nitrogen stabilizer in with it, like a weed and feed. We put our herbicide with it. Every year I pick a farm somewhere, a field, and try to wide drop or side dress a few gallons of nitrogen over the top of my full program, trying to look to see if nitrogen is a limiting factor. How much did I actually lose? And year in and year out, you might, some years you don't see any response. Some years you see a little bit of response, but never enough to pay for it. Maybe if I split applied, I honestly think I could gain a little bit. But again, labor is an issue. In our area, if you get 1.5 inches of rain when the corn is 1.5 feet tall, you might not get back into that field till that corn is 4 foot tall. If you get a few rain, and that changes your idea of side dressing. So we put it up front. Like I said, textbook says no, industry says no. We throw a stabilizer with it. Even in dry years where we don't get water to push it through the soil structure, or in really wet years where it's really pushed through the soil structure, it seems to hold.
It sounds like what you're looking at, though, and you've been experimenting with different things. You got to look at the return on the investment, obviously, and it doesn't sound like the return on the investment has been there to put the extra on when you look at the yields. Is that correct?
Yeah, for me, like I said, the farmer next door, he's going to disagree with me 100%, but it works. You got to figure out what works for you and your operation.
Right,
And
right.
the frustrating part is if I sit there and side dress or wide drop a couple field and I say, wow, I really made a big difference this year. I can't change my whole farming operation next year to do it because it might be the totally opposite thing. So I learn every year, keep notes and say, hey, maybe we should be pushing, trying something else because everything's different
Yeah.
every year.
I'm interested in what you're doing, but think about the neighbors around you. We are in tighter margins than maybe we have been as we look back the past several years, but we've gained a little bit since fall harvest. Is it changing what you're thinking, what others are thinking, what you're planning to do this year because it is a little tighter, or have we gained enough back in the last couple of months that, okay, I think I'm back to the regular plan, so to speak?
No, I think we're back to the regular plan, or I am anyway.
Okay.
Back in December, I mean, you were really thinking, what should we do different? What should we do different? There's no way we can make any money. We're just gonna be covering our butt, and hopefully it's not a complete disaster. We've gained a lot of this. Slowly poke away. If you're at that break even or around it, starts making some sales that we're doing to lock in to average out. Hopefully they're the worst sales we have all year. You never know. And go forward from that. If you deviate, in my opinion, if we deviate too much every year, we get very inconsistent as far as our programs. Hey, I'm going to cut back on fertility this year. Well, next year, if the margins are tight, we're going to cut back even more. And the next year, we're going to cut back even more. Now you've dug yourself a hole that you can't get out of. Again, you can't just keep throwing good money after bad. That's not a good scenario in the end either.
Right. You mentioned, though, that you sometimes try some different things on different acres. Are you kind of an experimenter trying different things, and whether it's, nitrogen or beyond? Because I know you're fairly progressively minded, looking at some different things and always willing to at least examine what might be an option for you.
When you were talking about margins, that was one thing that I do, or when I say I do, I'm starting to do. I'm trying to switch the operation to quality instead of quantity. I don't want to say anybody can go out there and just farm thousands and thousands of acres. I mean, depending on your location, you got to really fight for those. And if you're really fighting for them, you don't know if you're going to have them next year if they're rentals. I mean, I'm pretty blessed around our area. We've been the same way. I mean, we've had landlords for 50 years, in our operation. So I'm pretty safe that, I treat those like owned acres. And if there's ever change in that those lands, I'm part of that change. They question my opinion and things like that. I mean, you always have an anomaly somewhere, but so I keep at it for the fact that I don't want to sacrifice. You might be able to cut back a little bit here or there on bad years, but it's going to suffer in the long run to me. We'll switch things up. I don't want to cut back too much on fertility. We'll try to figure out somewhere else to cut back on. But if we can get quality instead of quantity, to me, that's if we can get those extra bushels. And I keep pick a field. Pick any field on your farm, whether it's 5 acres or 50 acres, depends on what farm, what you have, and throw the book at it. Plan. It's a joke that we say plan on losing money. Don't pinch pennies on that one single farm and see what it takes to find a home run. And then that way you learn. Well, if you screw up, you learn more from a screw up than you do a success.
Right. Are there any successes or screw ups you'd like to share with us so we can learn from them? Because those are always interesting as we think talking to different farmers.
No, I'm just joking. It's hard to say. When I say you don't know, and it's doing that. When I say throw the book at it, doing too many things at once, you don't know what product or what. Throwing a 2 or 3 fungicide pass on soybeans. Was it the first fungicide pass, the second, the third? Which actually did it, unless you were doing actual research, on individual. And I haven't broke it down that far. I'm learning that throwing a lot of these extra additives that you can do are building consistency. Last year I did a field, they were beautiful. Did it turn to yield? Not really. I mean, they were good beans, but they weren't that much more than any of my other fields. But they were extremely consistent. So I did learn I did not get yield last year, but I got consistency in the plant, at harvest, and moisture, and everything. So if I do that same thing this year and we get the right rains in August, maybe that consistency will relate to yield. I'm kind of just first year, second year into this mindset of picking these fields. So it's kind of early to tell what I found that works and doesn't work.
Right. You mentioned earlier on that you did some tissue sampling. Is that something that you regularly incorporate into the farm, is taking those samples and then trying to evaluate throughout the year?
I don't, I mean, if we have a problem, I will do it. But a lot of times, kind of like I said before, we had some yellow striping in corn and some issues, and we pulled this, and it's a quick process. But by the time we got the samples back, we were actually outgrowing some of that deficiencies. And again, it depends on your fields. I'm blessed that we've had a lot of these farms. Like I said, we've been farming for 40 or 50 years. I have a pretty good idea what the fertility is. So when we are seeing deficiencies, a lot of it is environmental, because we've addressed a lot of the deficiencies with the soil test just in the past.
Right.
So go ahead.
You mentioned that you have those long-term rental relationships, and of course, those are really like gold to have those. Yeah. But as you think of your area and your region, are land rental rates holding steady, going up? Has the recent drop back in prices, as we look back several years, and tighter margins, has that impacted anything, or is there still plenty of folks lining up to pay that or higher for some of these land rental costs?
Oh yeah, no matter where you're at, even though we're pretty consistent here, there's always somebody out there. I mean, if a farm comes for sale, there's still a lot of interest in it. So yeah, things have not softened by no means.
Give folks an idea. Land in your area it's a variable, but it might sell for what per acre if it was up for sale at auction or listed?
Oh, location, and soil type. I mean, where I was telling you, 20 miles west, where the land is a lot more uniform and good ground, there's nothing to sell for $12,000 an acre is not out of the question. A farm sold a couple weeks ago, east of me, 4 or 5 miles, and it was $5,400 an acre. But you get out west, out in Iowa or Illinois, and that's pennies. But
right.
On average, we're around 6,000 an acre here, just give or take. We can be a little bit less, a little bit more, but good ground, right? Good tiled ground would be that.
The land and the land rental, we think of that being long-term investment. So has the machinery market then backed up in your area? Because that's something I can more quickly change. Whereas if the neighbor's farm comes up for sale, I don't want to miss out that opportunity.
Most definitely. When margins are tight like this, everybody holds on to their expenditures. Like I said, we can throw some money. Hey, I planned on replacing that combine. I planned on replacing this, but we can throw some parts at it and afford. I mean, I always look at farmers can never afford a breakdown during harvest, but sometimes you have to evaluate that into your budget to do that instead of trying to go all the way out there and get behind with the interest rates are coming down, but you don't want to bury yourself either.
Right. Well, have interest rates then impacted farmers in your area as well? I know it's a mix of certain things, but we have now lived in these higher than what we were interest rates. Maybe I say long enough that we can kind of see that on the balance sheet now.
Yeah. And that's hard to say for the area because, you don't go up to the coffee shop and say, oh, by the way, I owe this much to the bank. Right. Or I owe this much to the green zone. Those stay pretty private. So that's pretty hard for me to judge the local area of what, but just in general, when you have high interest rates, everything, if you're going to spend $6,000-7,000 an acre for ground and you don't have much down payment, and if you got a higher interest rate, I mean, that's $500 an acre or more, give or take what your interest rates are. That's $500 an acre just in interest if you don't have any money down.
Right.
So then,
Right.
and that ground around here will not pay for that. So you got to pull money from other places and average everything together. That's one thing about agriculture. It has to be an average.
Right, right. Ryan, in the time we have left here, I'm just curious whether it's you or things you see in the area that you're planning to do different this year, or it doesn't necessarily have to relate to the tighter margins. I think all of us are trying to always be progressively minded, do things better. Any things that are on your mind as you head into this year?
I think pay attention to that little things. If we can find, instead of going out there and trying to farm the whole world, try to get things down to an acre to acre basis to an extent. I mean, I'm a production farmer too, so we always talk with somebody from research or other things like that, treat this acre different. Well, in production farming, that's pretty hard to do. It's still a law of averages. But I think if we can still get that mindset of halfway in between each of those, of trying to pay attention to those little details of, why is this 5 or 6 acre sand knob, it's always going to be less yield. Try to figure out something for that to increase yield, but still keep it within a good ROI. We can throw the world at it and make it good, but it will not necessarily pay for itself either. And finding that line between a good return on investment, that's the key in these tighter margins.
Yeah. Do you tend, because your land is that variable, to really zero in on the ROI per farm, or I guess we could say per acre? Does that change the management of each one of those farms quite a bit because it varies so much?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. If you're trying to take the sandier farm, that needs the most nutrients to succeed. Can you put, the maximum out there? No, you can't, because you will not get that ROI. So finding that fine line of what you can put out on those, if they're owned or rented, that makes a big difference too. And then go from there.
Right. And for you, you hope to be planting by when? What is a good start date in your area?
In our area, the early crop insurance date earliest is April 15th for us. So normally it's the first week in May. Last week in April, first week in May is, in general, that's when things get rolling. Some years it's the end of May, some years it's the end of April. All depends on the weather and the temperature.
And will you go with beans first or corn first, or can you do both at once?
We do both at once. Last year, I switched the mindset. Before, corn is king. You got to worry about corn. You got to get corn in. When corn is done, yeah, we'll pay attention to beans. Last year, I switched my mindset, and I had a quarter of my beans in, and a lot of it was those acres. I follow rotation pretty close, and pretty much what I put on paper in December will kind of the rotation that I follow. And those fields were ready for soybeans, so I pushed the envelope on early planting for beans, and last year it worked. I was happy with what I got from it.
Yeah, yeah.
So this year, like I said, depends on what fields are ready. We got 2 planters hooked up, 1 corn, 1 beans, and what field will be ready. If they're both ready, we will scrounge the best we can to get them both planted.
Right. Ryan, I appreciate the time, and it will be time to get the planters in the field pretty soon. So wish you all the best on the coming season.
All right. Nice talking to you.